Hello and welcome to the photography channel. I'm Nigel Cooper and today I'm taking a look at this bad boy. It's the Fuji GFX100S medium format camera. I'm going to be giving you a quick lowdown while running through some of the pros and cons of it, as well as a few other bits and pieces. Now, if I keep glancing over at my computer screen, I do apologize because I didn't have time to write up a proper auto cue script for this, and this has got to go back to Fuji tomorrow along with this GFX100 here. So I've got minimal time, so I figured I'd just refer to my bullet points. So okay, let's get moving. The positives, the image quality of this is just incredible. It's fantastic and the resolution is insane. Now, if you're not familiar with the GFX100S, it's actually got a 44 by 33 millimeter sensor, which is massive, and it's 102 megapixels. Now that compares to 36 by 24 that you would get on a full frame camera. So as you can see by that, it's a much larger sensor with 102 megapixels. So naturally, you're going to get really good resolution, a lot of detail. And it's just the flavor of these shots. The color reproduction is absolutely incredible. I'm going to show you a few images I took on the computer shortly. But just quickly moving on to the next one. I think in terms of who will this be suitable for, I think it's going to be ideal for studio work, landscape work, and fine art photography. Those photographers will love this camera just because of the picture quality and that insane resolution. I do a lot of portraiture, so I actually love the quality it gives in portrait mode as well for shooting portraits of people. I just love the warm colors that you get from this camera, the way it's actually been tuned, the color science. I just absolutely love it. It's fantastic. It's got in-body stabilization of about 5 stops and it works really well. I've been using this camera for about a week now. And basically with regard to that 5 stops, what's good about it is you only have to aim for about 10% over the focal length of the lens. With cameras, full frame cameras that don't have any kind of image stabilization or the film cameras, the general consensus was that you would aim for about double the focal length of the lens in shutter speed. So if you're shooting on a 100mm lens, you would actually have a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second at minimal. If you're shooting with a 50mm lens, then a minimum shutter speed of 100, and so on and so forth. This lens is 110mm f2, but normally you would be looking at a shutter speed of about 220th or above. But with this being 110mm, you've only got to go for about 125th because that in-body stabilization works really well. I can vouch for that. It's absolutely superb. And it's customizable, so you can either turn it off, you can have it on all the time, or just while you're shooting. I opted to have it in the just while you're shooting mode. And when I was depressing the shutter button halfway to get the focus to kick in, you can feel that IBS in-body, and it just keeps the image really still while you're hand holding it. It works to perfection. Really pleased with that. The focus tracking is also really good. It's nice and sticky. As long as the subject that you're tracking onto has got some element of contrast, it just sticks to it like glue, and that worked really well as well. So that's going to be good for wildlife photographers or sports photographers who choose to go medium format. They're going to have a nice sticky AF tracking mode. What else have we got? It's got IAF Detect. Unlike the Hasselblad S1D 250C, which has got no kind of IAF Detect or no IBS, this has both of those. And the IAF Detect works really well. I've seen a few YouTubers basically say it's a trifle sluggish. I don't think it is. Now, compared to my Sony a7 III, it was only probably just a couple of notches, maybe 5% difference. It's negligible. Now, given that this has got a larger medium format sensor and it's got 102 megapixels, I'm not surprised it's a trifle slower, but emphasis on the word trifle here. I just found that iDetect to be really quick and snappy. It's customizable, so you can actually choose to turn it off, or you can have it set to automatic, where it'll pick which eye it thinks you want in focus, or you can set it to pick the right eye or the left eye, and it works really well. I love that because I do a lot of portrait work, and IAF Detect is something that I couldn't live with now. So it's good to report that the GFX100S has got a really good IAF Detect system. Next, the batteries. The batteries are really cheap, and the reason they're really cheap, I'll just pop this out here, is because they're the same batteries that Fuji's smaller X-T4 camera takes. So it takes these batteries, which is kind of good and bad. It's good that they're easy and cheap to replace, but bad in that they're a little bit smaller, and given the size of this camera, you can still get about 400 shots, Fuji claim, on one of these batteries, but because they're cheap, I think they're about 55 or 60 pound, you can buy a couple more, or just even one spare. I'm sure 2 batteries will get you through a day's shoot. Next, it shoots in 14 and 16-bit RAW. Even in 14-bit, the images look absolutely amazing. I'm not even sure many people will see the difference with 16-bit, but the option is there if you want it. And fear not, there's a ton of dynamic range on this camera. Now, I was a little bit worried that because of the size of the sensor and the fact that it's got 102 megapixels, this means the actual size of each individual pixel is going to drop in microns a little bit. So because the pixels are a bit smaller, we all know that smaller pixels equals less tonal quality and dynamic range. But fear not, I didn't notice any lack in tonal quality or dynamic range at all. It had an insane amount of dynamic range. It's just absolutely fantastic given the size of the sensor and the fact that it's 102 megapixels. So absolutely love that. Next, another thing that's unique to Fuji is its film simulation modes. Now, this only works in JPEG, admittedly, but if you set the JPEG mode to the highest quality, fine or ultra fine, I think it is, and choose some of those film simulation modes, they are absolutely amazing. They're really good. You can actually shoot to RAW on one card and to JPEG on another. You've got 2 card slots in here. So if you shoot into JPEG and RAW on 2 different cards, you can actually choose one of those film simulation modes. Now, the film simulation modes are not just digital gimmicks, they're not just digital filters. They were designed by the people that did the original film stocks, and they are superb. I'm old school, I come from a film background. I used to use Fujichrome film and stuff like that back in the day, and the film simulation modes are going to be a treat and definitely worth trying out. But just remember, if you're going to shoot with the film simulation modes in JPEG mode, you're not going to have any headroom for post-production editing. So you are going to want to nail those shots in camera by getting the exposure absolutely smack on, just get the composition smack on. Make sure your colors are right, which they will be depending on the film simulation mode you've chose. Because in post with a JPEG, we all know that if you start to pull the hue sliders around in the sky, or start to try and adjust hue, saturation, the image is soon going to fall apart. So you do have to try and nail the shot in camera. But the options are there if you want them. And I'd highly recommend giving them a try. They're great fun and they look absolutely fantastic. Something else this camera's got is it's got this mode where it shoots 16 shots for a 400 megapixel file. Now this is going to be great for copying artwork and stuff like that, because you're going to get absolutely insane resolution. If you think 102 megapixels is insane, then it goes way beyond that. But be warned, because of the size of the sensor and the fact that it's got 102 megapixels, the way it does these sequence of shots is by shifting the sensor using the IBS that's in the camera. Now, if you think about how small a pixel is in here, it's so microscopic, you're not even going to hear or see that sensor move. So you're going to need, I'm just going to put this down because it's getting a bit heavy on the wrist. You are going to need not only a really solid tripod, but a really solid floor. Even some concrete floors can move. And when you're talking about pixels this small, when it's shifting from one shot to the next, even if there's someone just walks past the camera, even if you think it's a solid concrete floor, there can be some movement there. So if you're going to use that mode, solid concrete floor with no movement at all, a really solid heavy duty tripod, and I mean heavy duty and solid, preferably with a sack hanging off the middle of it with a couple of bricks to keep it even more solid. Use the self timer to start it off, and while the self timer is triggering, get out of the room and don't let anybody within a 5-mile radius of the building. Well, maybe a slight exaggeration, but you get my point. Anybody that's ever shot on a 10.8 film camera knows that that is a very tricky business. This is a very tricky business, shooting with this 16-shot 400 megapixel file mode. But if you're copying art in an art gallery and you take the time to set it up, it is quite usable. Not that I've done it, but I've heard of people having great success with it. Another thing of note is the viewfinder is fixed on this camera, unlike the GFX100 where it does remove. If I can just actually squeeze these buttons and get this to come off, there we go. That is a detachable viewfinder. This is on the GFX100, whereas on the GFX100S it is actually fixed, and it is slightly lower resolution than the GFX100 as well. Now, I actually prefer the fixed viewfinder. I just see it as one less place for dust to get in the camera, in all honesty. So I don't mind that. In fact, I'm a fan of it, which is why I put it under the positives. Next, we have a battery boost mode. Now, because it only has one battery, and in here, there's no optional contacts for a battery grip, so there will never be a battery grip available for this. And although you get about 400 shots on it, which is fair enough, it means because you can't put a battery grip on it, well, I'm going to come to the little thing about my pinky finger in a minute, but because it's only got the one battery, Fuji have come up with this ingenious way of being able to save power. Now, it's to do with the EVF, or the electronic viewfinder. In battery boost mode, you can basically change it for either more frames per second in the EVF or more resolution. So you would want to switch it to the more frames per second by sacrificing resolution if you're doing any kind of sports photography, you're tracking a sports car, for example, because you're going to want more frames per second to get a smoother image in the viewfinder, but the resolution takes a bit of a hit. Or if you're doing portraiture, landscape, or anything that doesn't have much movement, you can basically flick it to prioritize high resolution and sacrifice frames per second. I think it drops to about 50, which is going to be more than enough for most stuff. Even some sports photographers probably won't mind that if they want more resolution. So you've got the option there as to which ones to go for. Right, let me move on quickly to the negatives. I find, again, this is personal, this is my findings from using this camera for the last sort of week. I find that I'm always nudging this dial on the front of the camera here. Now, by default, this is dialed set to change the ISO. And when the camera's turned on, I just seem to nudge it 2 stops that way or 2 clicks that way, which shifts my ISO from 100 to 3200 because it goes round the other way. So, you know, I was sometimes pressing the shutter button halfway and getting insane readings in the camera with the shutter speed and think what's going on, because the ISO had shifted from 100 up to 3200. So I've got to keep remembering to check that and keep knocking it back to 100. I'm sure you can change that in the menu settings to do something else, but whatever you change it to, you're probably still going to nudge it and knock it anyway. Same for the aperture ring on the lens here. I found that I was just constantly nudging this. I would have it set to f11 if I was out doing some landscape shot and just picking the camera up and moving it. I've suddenly moved it to f8 or f5.6. So again, I've got to keep checking it. I would have liked that to have been a bit stiffer. This is Fuji's 110mm f2 lens. I don't know what the other lenses are like, but you know, that's just something to be aware of as well. In terms of the focusing speed, I found this lens nice and quick. I've heard some YouTubers say that the autofocus speed on different Fuji lenses may vary somewhat, which I'd expect to be true, but on this 110mm f2, I just found it to be nice and quick and nice and snappy. Now, pinky finger. Because of the size of the camera, it is a little bit bigger than a regular mirrorless camera in full frame or micro four third, but my pinky finger sits under the camera and not around the front of the grip here like this. So if I just hold it normally where my finger is here on the shutter button, I've only got these two on the front and this pinky finger just sits underneath, not gripping anything at all. Now this is annoying because if you take away the pinky finger and this finger, you're basically only gripping the camera with these two and the thumb on the back, and that doesn't feel very safe. It's the camera's about £5,700 for the body only. I'm not too sure the price of this lens, but it's not something you'd want to drop. I would have liked this bottom to have come down another centimetre to allow me to grip it like this. But when I put my finger in position here, it sits underneath the camera and doesn't really grip anything. Now, Fuji do a grip called a MHG GFX100S hand grip. It's not a battery grip, it's just a small hand grip, and it's only about 1 centimetre tall from what I've seen in the images, that just screws onto the bottom, that just extends the bottom of this camera by about 1 centimetre, so your pinky finger does grip it. Now, I'm sure Fuji have designed that because they probably had a lot of feedback from people saying, look, I can't grip the camera properly, which begs the question, why are manufacturers obsessed with making the smallest camera on the planet and then having their engineers work 24 hours a day, morning, noon and night, figuring out how to cram all the gubbins inside it? The Fuji engineers would have done themselves and the photographers a massive favour if they'd have just made this base, the height of the camera, about another centimetre higher. That way we could have got our pinky fingers around the front and they wouldn't have had such a bad or such a hard time trying to squeeze all the gubbins into it. They would have made life so much easier for themselves. And they could have made a stronger base plate with a better tripod bush system that is going to be less likely to crack. Now, I'm going to get onto that in a minute. But with regard to the quality of this base plate, I'm not convinced about it. I actually took some photographs of this, which I'm going to show you in a minute on the computer to show you what I'm talking about. I did actually take a screwdriver to this camera and I took the bottom sections out and I took it apart just enough to be able to see what's going on with this tripod bush here. Now, fear not, many years ago I used to repair flutes for a living, which involved lots of intricate work with small jeweler screwdrivers to strip flutes down, repad them, put them back together, that kind of thing. And in my early 20s, I did have a stint working in a couple of photographic shops in London in retail, and I spent the odd afternoon in a camera repair centre in North London where the owner kindly showed me various camera repair techniques. So I am confident enough to strip a camera down and put it back together. Not that that's what I've done with this, but I did strip the bottom of it down enough to be able to look inside and see what's going on with regard to this tripod bush. And from an engineering point of view, it's not great. There's a weak spot in there. Again, I'll show you a picture on the computer in a minute. I'm also going to show you some of the images I took just so you can look at how insane the resolution is and the picture quality of this camera is. So yeah, I think that's about it. Now, just quickly to compare it to Fuji's GFX100, this body only is just shy of 10,000, whereas I think the body only of the S is just under 6. It's between 5,500 and 6,000, depending where you look. The key difference is this one's got the interchangeable viewfinder. It's exactly the same 102 megapixel sensor, so there's no difference in image quality, and it's the same lenses. But what you're paying for on this, you're getting the interchangeable viewfinder. This viewfinder's higher resolution and better quality. And also, if you do any kind of tethering, you can actually have a tethered USB cable plugged into this and have a power cable plugged in at the same time. With the GFX100S, you can basically only have one or the other. You can have a USB cable plugged in to power it, but then you can't tether. So if you're going to tether with this, you're going to be limited to the one battery that's in it to about 400 shots. Whereas with this one, you can power it and tether it together. That is about the only difference. If I just sort of pull this out here, you can see that there's two batteries in the battery grip here. And that is another difference in that it has this battery grip on the bottom. So my pinky finger's around the front, and you can spin it that way because we've got the usual buttons here and the matching buttons on the back to use with your thumb. So side by side, if I just take the lens off this one quickly, there we go. You can actually see approximately the difference if I line those up there. That's about the difference we have in height. So that is a key difference there. That's about the only differences between this 100S and the 100. Whether you'd actually want to spend an extra $4.5 grand to get a better viewfinder and an interchangeable viewfinder and the battery grip and the power option for tethering is entirely up to you. Personally, I wouldn't. I would rather stick with this, but I would like to know how this feels with that additional base plate on it. Okay, so let me just quickly jump onto the computer and show you the photograph of the bottom part of the camera stripped down. Well, not really stripped down, but taken apart. And I'm going to show you some images I took as well. Okay, so I've got some photographs here that I want to show you. I'm going to basically just flick through them so you can see what I've got. I'm going to start at the top and just quickly talk you through these because this is to do with the build quality of the Fuji GFX100S and that base plate is the thing that I seem to have an issue with. Now, this is a gentleman in America, and this is a couple of screen grabs off his YouTube video. This admittedly is a Fuji GFX100S, but as you can see, his base plate is just cracked and broken away, and here you can see the little tripod bush. You can see how thin this metal is here, and I'm going to basically come back to that here with some of my other images. But basically what happened with this guy, he's basically documented this on YouTube, where he had the camera mounted on a tripod in his studio with a carpet on the floor, and while he was tethering, he pulled the USB cable and pulled the camera over. Now, even though it hit carpet, quite a thick carpet, just a shock of that caused this base plate to snap away, and it remained attached to his tripod plate. He's quite annoyed because he contacted Fuji USA and they told him the camera was a write-off when he was arguing that all he needed them to do was send a replacement base plate. And as you can see here where I'm mousing, it's just held in with these screws. It's just a simple case of taking the base plate off and putting another one on. It would have taken seconds. But Fuji USA refused to send him one. They said, sorry, your camera's kaput. He still uses the camera, but he's just gaffer taped it all up and he only uses it handheld, so he's not a happy bunny. Now, this is the GFX100S, As I mentioned earlier in the video, I did take a screwdriver to this, but I know what I'm doing. Don't try this at home. I wouldn't recommend it because dust might get in there. I did have this in a dust-free environment when I was doing it. As you can see here, that little metal plate there, if I just scroll down a little bit further, you can just see that's a very thin piece of metal. You know, you can just bend that in half with between your thumb and forefinger quite easily. So that metal plate goes on here, held in with these screws. These screws are all very small. They're about the same size as the screws that would hold the side pieces onto your glasses, the bits that go over the ear, very tiny. So basically, that comes off. It's held in via these holes here around the edges, as you can see. Now, this little bit here is a concerning section because here we got the tripod bush itself, which looks like this. If I just sort of show you a different angle of it. That's from the back and that is from the front. Now this is only held in by via these two screws here in these two holes. Forget these other ones, they're just positioning holes. If I go back to here, you've got those two little bits that protrude, and that is lined up with these two holes here. So that section there is just held on again by these two very small screws here, as you can see down in the bottom right hand corner, into that bit, and when it's fitted it looks like that. So you have the two screws holding it on. Now if I just go back to this other shot with it off, this is the bit that concerns me because it's not milled aluminium alloy. This is what they refer to in the business as monkey metal. It's basically that cast metal that cracks and breaks, and it's not as robust as a proper aluminium alloy. Now, the concerning thing about this is it doesn't have any front section here. It's just this sort of half circle bit here, and only these two screws that hold this section into it. Now, the worrying thing about this from an engineering point of view, it has a weak point down this edge because this bit here is basically attached to the chassis inside the body, and basically the whole weight of the camera and lens when it's on the tripod is literally just resting on this one edge here. So again, I'm going to go back to this shot. That's with the actual metal bit screwed in place. Again, all the strain is being taken up just by that one edge. And even when the plate is put back on, yes, you've got those four screws there that are basically going into these four holes here. But given how thin this little plate is, that is hardly giving it any robustness. Now, for me, I'm just going to scroll back here. If you have a heavy lens, like a portrait lens, the 110mm f2 that was just on this camera, it's very heavy. Now, if this camera is mounted on a tripod in portrait angle, sideways on, basically you got the whole weight of the camera, the weight of a heavy lens, all being supported just by this tiny little metal edge. So if that camera was to take a bit of a knock on the top or the side, then all the strain is on this little metal edge. Again, it's not a proper metal alloy, it's a cheaper type metal, and that doesn't bode well for strength. So there it is. I just thought I would run that by you so you can see how this thing's been engineered. And in my opinion, it hasn't been engineered that well. It could have been a better design, like I mentioned earlier in the video. If the actual camera was about 1 centimeter higher, then they could have basically had a better quality base plate that's going to be less susceptible to cracking and breaking. So if you do go to buy a GFX100S like this one, I would basically recommend treating it with kid gloves when mounted on a tripod with a heavy lens. Now, I'm going to try and, well, I won't try actually, I am going to end this little section on a more positive note, which is, after all, what it's all about, picture quality. So here's some shots that I've taken on this camera. They're 102 megapixel files, and just for your information, the actual file sizes of these are about 208 megapixels each, which compares to about 108 megapixels on Hasselblad's X1D 250C. Or about 40 megapixels on a decent full frame camera. So they are 208 megapixel files each on average. So depending on what your storage system is, you might have to upgrade it and get some more gigabyteage, as it were. So let's just have a quick look at this first shot here that I took of a friend of mine. She wanted a corporate headshot for a business. So this is just one of many that I took. I'm just going to zoom in here to going to 100%. Why not? Let's go into 100%. Just look at the detail here that we have in the eye. I mean, you've got all this kind of, you can see the veins, you can see the eyelashes, every little bit of detail, you know, in the skin. We have this kind of what I call peach hair that some ladies have around the nose here. Just the detail is absolutely insane that we're getting here. Let me just shift up to another image, see what else we got. Here we go. There's another shot here. Again, just looking at this little metal post here, I'm going to zoom in quite a long way. How far in can I get here before we can actually read what it says on this lamppost, not lamppost, but little posty bit here. We can see here that it says the National Trust for the upkeep of something or another. But zoomed in at 100%, just, you know, look at the detail we have in the concrete, in the wood, in this rope along here and in the grass. It's just insane how much detail we have coming from this camera. Not surprising, given that it's a larger format sensor. And I don't know if we can quite read that right in. Yes, we can, just about. I don't know if you can on YouTube by the time it's been compressed. But I'm really impressed with how much detail this thing resolves. It is, it's crazy. This is not the most flattering shot. I took it with a Bones ring flash because I just wanted a flat lit subject. But I'm going to zoom in here to an eye. My computer can hurry up and catch up with me and render this out. Here we go. Let me just zoom in on this right eye here. Oops. There we go. I mean, again, look, the tiny little veins in the eye. Look at that. You can just see the veins. You can see the eyelashes, the little hairs around the cheek here and on the cheekbone, and even the little hairs here in the eyelid. This is just really good resolution. If I sort of zoom out all the way again, you can just see again the tonal range and tonal clarity. There's lots of tonal range in it. Here's another one. Let me sort of zoom in on this. There we go. Wait for the computer to render that out. Let me just sort of go into that right eye again here. Again, you know, we just got really good detail here in the eyelashes. Look at this eyebrow here, in the hair. Really impressive stuff with regard to detail and tonal range. I took this one on purpose against the sky. There's no evidence of any kind of fringing. If I just zoom in on this branch and wait for it to render out, there we go. I can't see any purple fringing going on around the edges of these branches, which is a testament to the quality of that lens. It's a really nice lens. Here's another one. Again, if you look up here on the on this little balcony, we've got somebody sitting there, and I'm going to zoom in on her, and you'll even be able to see that she's holding a cigarette. If I just sort of zoom in, let's keep going here. Where are we? There we are. We're zoomed in at 200%. Tiny bit of stepping down the edge of the cigarette, but if you think how far I've just zoomed into 200%, at least we can see that she's actually holding a cigarette there. If I come out to 100%, it's clearer, but you can definitely see the cigarette and the detail in the brickwork. Just lots of detail, even in the metalwork on the railings here. It's really good. I'm very impressed with the amount of detail that this camera is resolving. What we got here, shot at the back of my car. Yeah, I need a new one. It's 15 years old. What can I say? Again, the detail here in the well, it's a little bit of snow. It's more sort of sleeting a little bit that morning. We've got with these crystals, which just give off really nice detail. So yeah, there we are. That one's going to take a while to render out. There we are. It popped into place. Overall, really impressed with the amount of resolution and detail and the tonal range of this camera. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this bit and some of these images. Okay, so that's it. I'm Nigel Cooper. You've been watching the photography channel. Again, remember, this is just my personal opinion on both these cameras, and it's just my own thoughts and feelings on them. Sorry that I haven't been quite so sycophantic with it. I've said a lot of good things about this camera and a few negatives. But at the end of the day, we can't all be sycophantic reviewers. I know a lot of YouTube reviewers are scared to say bad things about manufacturers' equipment these days in case that manufacturer won't send them gear to review anymore and they need to make money out of their advertising. I get that. But at the end of the day, I don't mind pointing out these negatives, because if everybody gives sycophantic reviews on equipment all the time, it's just sending out the wrong message. That basically gets back to the manufacturers. And the board of directors or the people that are in charge of the purse strings will think, well, you know, nobody complained about it on YouTube. We got rave reviews. Nobody complained about the price. So I tell you what, next year on the new model, let's see if we can make it even cheaper by using cheaper parts, and let's put the price up again, and let's sort of see how much we can push them. And the following year, those same YouTubers will give the same old sycophantic reviews, and so on and so forth. So as the years go by, products get cheaper and cheaper in the build quality, and they get more expensive. And it's because we've asked for it. Now, at the end of the day, if people are a little bit more honest with their reviews and give their proper feedback, the guys back in Japan, Germany, China, wherever they're made, they'll think, you know, maybe we should actually, let's do something about this base plate. Let's make the body out of solid aluminium alloy instead of this, what I like to call monkey metal, which is basically like a cast metal, almost what coat hangers are made out of. You know, if you bend a coat hanger back and forth and it snaps and you look inside it, you've got those little air pockets where it's just sort of cast, almost like Le Creuset frying pans. If you drop one of those, it doesn't bend, it cracks. And that's what happens with this type of metal that's in here. It's just a cast type metal. And when it cracks and breaks, it looks like a crunchy bar inside. That's one of the things that I love about the Hasselblad X1D2. It's made out of a solid piece of aluminium alloy that's been milled. And there's a difference between milling metal and casting it. Casting it is a cheap way of saving a few pounds on the production line, and I'm not a fan of it, especially when you're spending 10 grand on a camera like this one. And yes, this has got a similar thing with a base plate, or nearly £6,000 on this. It's not good enough in my opinion. So sorry for pointing those things out, but I just thought it necessary that I do. So I'm Nigel Cooper, this is the Photography Channel. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope to see you again real soon. Bye for now.